Ever catch yourself watching kids play, you know? Like really getting into it, building forts, making up rules, totally lost in their own world. And you kind of think, wow, what is it about play that's so captivating, even for us grown-ups? Well, get this. What if I told you those games of tag and make-believe might hold a clue to one of humanity's biggest mysteries, the origins of religion? Yeah, you heard that right. Turns out the line between kids wrestling in the living room and ancient rituals might be blurrier than we think. So buckle up, because we're about to go on a deep dive into some seriously fascinating research on the evolution of religion. We're talking about a dense, thought-provoking book called Religion in Human Evolution. It's a real head-scratcher, but trust me, payoff is huge. We're going way back beyond organized religion, beyond written scriptures, beyond those fancy temples, to explore where this whole human impulse to believe in something bigger than ourselves, something beyond the everyday, even began. Okay, let's unpack this. First things first, religion. It's a cultural system, right? A whole web of beliefs, practices, and, that feeling of connecting to something transcendent. But how did it all start? Could it be rooted in something deeper, something more primal, something, well, maybe even a little bit surprising? Clifford Geertz, this brilliant anthropologist, had this idea of overlapping realities. He basically said there's the everyday world, the common sense world, where we're like, okay, this is a coffee cup, the sun's out, 2 + 2 = 4. Makes sense, right?
Sure.
But then Geertz argued that there are these other realities we create through culture, things like art, music, and, yep, you guessed it, religion. And get this, these created realities aren't just separate, like existing in a vacuum. They actually overlap with our everyday world, influencing how we see things, how we act, how we understand our place in everything. Think about it. Have you ever been to a concert and the music just like completely transports you? Or maybe you had a moment of awe in nature, like standing under a sky full of stars, and felt this overwhelming sense of connection to something vast and mysterious. Those are those realities overlapping. Those moments where the everyday world seems to, shimmer and reveal something deeper. Here's where it gets really interesting. As human societies evolved, so did religion. Back when we were just small groups of hunter-gatherers living that nomadic life, religion was probably pretty simple too, right? But as things got more complex, as we started settling down, farming the land, building cities, developing social hierarchies, boom, religion got more complex too. It started developing narratives and rituals that reflected these new ways of life, these power structures, these changing understandings of the world. For example, think about the Axial Age, this period in the first millennium BCE, when all sorts of new philosophical and religious ideas were popping up across the globe. You had the ancient Greeks, the Israelites, the Chinese, the Indians, all wrestling with these big existential questions about the meaning of life, the nature of reality, the existence of the divine. And their religious beliefs were evolving right alongside these philosophical shifts. It's like this incredible feedback loop, culture shaping religion, religion shaping culture. But hold on a second. If religion is this cultural creation, this product of human imagination and social forces, how come it feels so real? I mean, people don't just think they believe in God or the divine or whatever, right? They feel it. It's like a deep, visceral experience. Now, Abraham Maslow, the hierarchy of needs guy, he had something to say about this. He talked about 2 different ways of experiencing the world: being cognition and deficiency cognition. Deficient cognition is all about our basic needs, right? Food, water, shelter, safety, that gotta have it stuff. It's focused on what we lack, what we need to get by. Sounds familiar, right? It's basically our default mode, that common sense world we were talking about. But being cognition is different. It's about experiencing the world as a whole, as a unified thing. It's about awe and wonder, about feeling connected to something bigger than ourselves, beyond our immediate needs and wants. And Maslow thought that religious experiences often tapped into this being cognition. It's like they're connecting us to a different dimension of reality, a reality that's always there, humming beneath the surface, but that we often miss in our day-to-day grind. So maybe, just maybe, that feeling of religious reality isn't just some made-up thing, some cultural fabrication. Maybe it's a glimpse into a different way of experiencing the world, a way that's been with us for a long, long time. Okay, but how does religion actually communicate its message? How does it convey these deep truths, these glimpses into the transcendent? Turns out it uses these things called representations. Think of it like this: unitive events, an active representation, and symbolic representation. These are the tools religion uses to make the abstract concrete, to connect us to those overlapping realities, to bridge the gap between the everyday and the divine. First up, unitive events. These are those powerful, often wordless experiences that connect you to something larger than yourself. Think about a mystical experience, right, where you feel this overwhelming sense of unity or a deeply moving communal ritual that brings people together in a shared sense of purpose and belonging. These are unitive events, moments of transcendence that leave a lasting impact. Then there's enactive representation, which is basically embodying religious meaning through physical actions. Things like bowing, kneeling, dancing, sharing a meal. These aren't just empty gestures, right? They're ways of physically enacting religious beliefs and values. You're not just thinking about them, you're living them, expressing them through your body, your movements, your interactions with others. And finally, we've got symbolic representation. This is where things get really interesting, because we're talking about using stuff to stand for something else, to point beyond the literal to a deeper meaning. Icons, music, poetry, myths, stories, these are all symbols that help us make sense of the world, connect with the transcendent, and transmit those big, complex religious ideas across generations. Personally, I'm a sucker for a good story, right? So I was totally captivated by how important myth and narrative are in religion. Think about it. Every religion has its own creation story, its own heroes and villains, its own explanation for why we're here and what it all means. And these stories aren't just for entertainment, right? They're powerful tools for shaping our understanding of the world, guiding our behavior, and, transmitting values and beliefs across time. They're like recipes for action, these narratives. They tell us how to live, how to treat others, what to value. They can be incredibly inspiring, right? Giving us a sense of purpose and direction. But let's be real. They can also be used to justify some pretty messed up things like oppression, violence, intolerance. That's why it's so important to be critical of the stories we tell ourselves and to question the narratives that shape our lives. Okay, ready for this? This is where things get seriously mind-blowing. What if I told you that the roots of religion might go all the way back to, wait for it, the origins of mammalian play? Yeah, you heard that right. Play. Those epic games of tag, those wrestling matches in the living room. Turns out they might have been practiced for some seriously important stuff later on, like bonding with your tribe, creating social order, even forming the basis for religion. I know, right? It sounds crazy, but stay with me here. Play has some pretty fascinating characteristics. First, it's bounded. It has a beginning and end. It takes place in a specific time and space. Like, think about a playground, a game board, a designated play area. It's not just random chaos, right? There are rules, boundaries, a shared understanding of what's going on. Second, play is cooperative. Even if you're playing a competitive game, you need others to play with you. You need to agree on the rules. You need to work together to make the game happen. It's like this mini society, with its own set of norms and expectations. And finally, play requires shared intentionality. Everyone involved has to be on the same page, has to understand that they're playing. You can't just tackle someone and be like, oh, I thought we were playing. That's not play. That's, probably a lawsuit waiting to happen. So what does this have to do with religion? Well, some scholars believe that ritual, a key aspect of pretty much every religion, might have actually evolved from play. Think about it. Rituals are also bounded, right? They have a specific time and place, like a temple, a church, a sacred space.
Right.
They also involve specific rules and actions that everyone follows. And most importantly, they require that shared intentionality, that understanding that something special, something meaningful is happening. But here's the crucial difference between play and ritual. Rituals have deeper meaning and social consequences. They're not just about having fun. They're about connecting with something bigger than yourself, reinforcing social bonds, shaping human behavior. establishing a moral order. It's like play, but with a capital S for serious. So how do we go from those playful mammals to, us religious humans? Enter Merlin Donald, this anthropologist with a seriously thought-provoking theory about how human culture evolved. He suggested 3 major stages: mimetic culture, mythic culture, and theoretic culture. First, mimetic culture. Think early humans developing the ability to imitate, learn complex skills, and communicate through gestures. Like you watch someone make a tool, you try to copy them, you get better at it over time. This ability to imitate and learn from each other was huge for our ancestors. It allowed them to transmit knowledge, create shared experiences, and, basically up their survival game. Then came mythic culture boom. Language and narrative explode onto the scene. We're not just miming things anymore. We're talking about them, telling stories, creating myths, building complex systems of meaning. This is where things get really interesting, because Donald argues that ritual played a key role in this transition from mimetic to mythic culture. Imagine those early humans gathered around a fire, right? Dancing and chanting, moving together in a shared rhythm. They're not just mimicking actions anymore. They're creating something new, something meaningful. They're strengthening social bonds, establishing a shared identity, and maybe, just maybe, laying the groundwork for the development of language and narrative. It's like they're literally creating the building blocks of culture, step by step, beat by beat. And finally, we reach theoretic culture, the age of abstract thought, logic, philosophy, science. We're not just telling stories anymore. We're analyzing them, questioning them, building complex systems of thought. But even in this stage, those ancient impulses that need to connect, to find meaning, to create order, it doesn't go away. It just takes on new forms. So what does this all mean? Well, it suggests that religion might not be some recent invention, but rather this deep-seated impulse, this legacy of our ancient past. This urge to connect with something larger than ourselves, to find meaning through shared rituals and narratives, to create order out of chaos. It might be woven into the very fabric of who we are. And understanding these deep roots, it can give us a new perspective on religion's continued importance in human societies, even in our modern secular world. Makes you wonder about that human need for meaning, right? It's like we're wired for it. And maybe, just maybe, understanding where it came from can help us appreciate its power, its potential, and even its challenges in the world today. Okay, so we've been talking about this big picture view of religion and evolution, right? But let's zoom in a little, get a bit more specific. How did these ideas actually play out in different cultures throughout history? How did religion evolve alongside human societies, shaping and being shaped by those social forces, those shifts in power, those changing understandings of the world? Think about it. One of the most dramatic shifts in human history was the transition from those small, egalitarian hunter-gatherer bands to larger, more complex agricultural societies. It's like going from a nomadic, free-flowing existence to, settling down, farming the land, accumulating resources. And with that shift came the emergence of, you guessed it, social hierarchies. Suddenly you've got leaders, chiefs, kings, emperors, all these power structures that need to be explained, justified, legitimized. And guess what steps in to help make sense of it all? Yep, religion. It's like this amazing adaptive tool, constantly evolving to meet the needs of changing societies. So as these societies become more complex, so do their religions. We start to see narratives and practices that reflect and reinforce those new power structures. It's like religion is providing a cosmic blueprint for how society should be organized, who's in charge, and why everyone should follow the rules. For example, you start seeing the emergence of powerful leaders whose authority is linked to the divine. They're not just kings or emperors. They're chosen by the gods. They're intermediaries between the human and supernatural realms. It's like their power is, supercharged with divine legitimacy. And it's not just about individual leaders, right? The whole social order gets wrapped up in religious beliefs and practices. You have elaborate rituals that reinforce social hierarchies, myths that explain the origins of those hierarchies, and moral codes that support the existing power structures. It's like this whole intricate system designed to keep things running smoothly, to maintain order, to prevent chaos. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not like everyone just blindly accepted these new hierarchies. There was definitely pushback, resistance, people questioning the status quo. But religion played a powerful role in shaping how people understood and responded to those changes. Think about the concept of divine kingship, right? In many ancient societies, kings weren't just political leaders. They were considered actual gods, or at least semi-divine beings. Their power wasn't just political, it was sacred. Challenging their authority wasn't just treason, it was sacrilege. You see this in ancient Egypt, where the pharaoh was seen as the embodiment of the god Horus. In ancient Mesopotamia, where kings were believed to have a special relationship with the gods. And in ancient China, where the emperor's mandate to rule was seen as divinely ordained. It's like this idea of divine kingship was a way of making political authority unquestionable, linking it to a higher power, making it seem almost inevitable. But here's the thing. Even in these hierarchical societies, there were still traces of that earlier egalitarianism, that impulse towards equality and cooperation that we see in play and ritual. It's like that primal urge, that need for fairness and balance never completely disappeared. It just got, woven into the fabric of these more complex societies, finding expression in different ways. For example, in some cultures, you have rituals that symbolically reaffirm the equality of all people, even within a hierarchical system. It's like a way of acknowledging that at a fundamental level, we're all connected. We're all part of something larger than ourselves. You also see myths and stories that challenge the status quo, questioning the legitimacy of power, offering alternative visions of social order. It's like these narratives are keeping alive that spark of egalitarianism, that yearning for a more just and equitable world. So even as religion was evolving to reflect and support these new hierarchies, it was also preserving some of those core values of equality and cooperation that we see in our earliest ancestors. It's like this complex dance, a back and forth between hierarchy and equality, between power and justice, between the individual and the collective. And it's a dance that continues to this day. Okay, let's shift gears a little and talk about another fascinating aspect of religion's evolution. The emergence of specialized religious roles and institutions. Remember those early hunter-gatherer societies we talked about? Where religion was probably pretty informal, decentralized, everyone participating in rituals and ceremonies. Well, as societies become more complex, religion starts to get more organized, more institutionalized. It's like going from a band of nomadic musicians to a full-blown symphony orchestra, right? You've got specialist conductors, a hierarchy of roles, a whole system for creating and performing complex music. So in religion, you start seeing the emergence of full-time religious specialists, priests, shamans, prophets, you name it. These folks dedicate their lives to serving the gods, guiding the spiritual lives of their communities. They develop specialized knowledge, rituals, and practices that set them apart, making them the go-to experts on all things spiritual. And alongside these specialists, you get the development of religious institutions, temples, churches, monasteries. These physical spaces become centers of worship, learning, and community. They're not just buildings, right? They're symbols of religious authority, places where people gather to connect with the divine, to learn about their faith, to reinforce those social bonds. Now, this emergence of specialized roles and institutions, it had a huge impact on how religion evolved. On the one hand, it led to greater complexity and sophistication. Religious beliefs and practices became more elaborate, more codified, and more systematized. It's like going from a collection of oral stories to a written scripture, from a loose collection of rituals to a formalized liturgy. But on the other hand, it also created some, shall we say, interesting challenges. For one thing, it introduced the potential for conflict between religious and secular authorities. When you've got powerful religious institutions, they can sometimes clash with the powers that be, kings, emperors, politicians. It's like this ongoing tension between the spiritual and the temporal, the sacred and the profane. You also see the potential for religious institutions to become, how can I put this delicately, a little too focused on power and dogma, Sometimes they lose touch with the needs of the people they're supposed to be serving. When religion becomes too rigid, too obsessed with rules and hierarchies, it can lose its spiritual vitality, its connection to the lived experiences of ordinary people. And then there's the whole issue of religious diversity. As different religious traditions merged and spread, they sometimes came into conflict with each other, right? And this could lead to tension, persecution, even violence. It's like that old saying, too many cooks spoil the broth, but with, way higher stakes. So the evolution of specialized religious roles and institutions, it's a mixed bag. It brought about greater complexity and sophistication, but it also created new challenges and tensions that continue to shape the religious landscape today.
It's like a never-ending story, this interplay between religion and human societies, this constant dance of adaptation, innovation, and, well, sometimes a bit of drama too. True self. And they suggest that Atman is ultimately identical with Brahman. It's like they're saying, hey, guess what? You're not just this limited individual being. You're actually part of something much bigger, something eternal and infinite. You are, in a sense, divine. This idea that the individual soul is one with the ultimate reality is a central tenet of Hinduism and has profound implications for how Hindus understand the nature of self, the purpose of life, and the path to liberation. So the Vedic tradition, it was this dynamic and ever-evolving tapestry of beliefs, practices, and philosophical speculations. It laid the groundwork for Hinduism, one of the world's oldest and most diverse religions, and it continues to shape Indian culture and spirituality to this day. It's like this ancient river, flowing through the centuries, constantly changing, adapting, but always carrying with it the essence of those original Vedic insights.
Now let's shift our focus to another pivotal moment in the evolution of ancient Indian religion, the emergence of Buddhism. It all started with Siddhartha Gautama, a prince who lived in northern India in the 6th century BCE. He was born into a life of privilege and luxury, the whole 9 yards, palaces, servants, you name it. But he became disillusioned with the material world, seeing the suffering that was all around him, the impermanence of everything, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. So he did what any sensible prince would do. He renounced his wealth and status, left his family, and set out on a quest for enlightenment, a way to escape the suffering that seemed inherent to human existence. After years of meditation and spiritual practice, he achieved enlightenment under a Bodhi tree, like one of those aha moments that changes everything. And he became known as the Buddha, the awakened one, the enlightened one, the guy who figured it all out. The Buddha's teachings challenged the authority of the Brahmins, the priestly class of the Vedic tradition. He wasn't about those elaborate rituals and sacrifices, the whole pomp and circumstance of the Vedic religion. He was all about getting to the heart of the matter, finding a practical path to liberation from suffering. He rejected the caste system, the elaborate rituals of sacrifice, and the idea that liberation could only be achieved through knowledge of the Vedas. He was like, hey, everyone deserves a shot at enlightenment, regardless of their social status or the knowledge of ancient scriptures.
Oh.
It was a radical message of equality and accessibility, opening up the path to liberation to everyone. Instead of all that ritual and dogma, the Buddha offered a new path to enlightenment based on the 4 noble truths. 1, the truth of suffering life is full of it, right? From the little annoyances to the big heartbreaks, suffering is just part of the human experience. 2, the truth of the cause of suffering, our attachment to desire, to things being a certain way, to our own sense of self. It's like we're clinging to things that are constantly changing, and that clinging creates suffering. 3, the truth of the end of suffering nirvana, that state of liberation, of freedom from attachment, from the cycle of birth and death. It's like reaching the other shore, finding that place of peace and tranquility that's always been there, just beneath the surface of our turbulent minds. And 4, the truth of the path to the end of suffering, the Eightfold Path, a set of guidelines for living a life that leads to liberation. It's not about magic spells or elaborate rituals. It's about cultivating wisdom, compassion, and ethical conduct. It's about training your mind, paying attention, and living in a way that aligns with reality, with the way things actually are. The Buddhist teachings spread rapidly throughout India and beyond, attracting people from all walks of life. It was a message of hope, a way to escape the suffering that seemed so pervasive. And Buddhism continues to be a major world religion today, with millions of followers around the globe. It's like this ancient wisdom tradition, offering a path to peace and liberation in a world that can often feel chaotic and overwhelming. Now let's touch briefly on another ancient Indian tradition that emerged around the same time as Buddhism, Jainism. Jainism was founded by Mahavira, a contemporary of the Buddha, who also renounced a life of privilege and set out on a quest for spiritual liberation. Just like there was something in the air back then. A spiritual awakening, a yearning for something more than the material world could offer. Jainism emphasizes nonviolence, ahimsa, as its central tenet. Jains believe that all living beings have souls, and that causing harm to any living being creates bad karma. They're like the ultimate pacifists, right? Committed to nonviolence in thought, word, and deed. They practice strict vegetarianism, avoid harming even insects, and strive to live a life of simplicity and detachment. It's like they're trying to tread lightly on the earth, to minimize their impact on other beings, to live in a way that honors the interconnectedness of all life. Jainism, like Buddhism, challenged the authority of the Brahmins and offered an alternative path to enlightenment. It's like they were part of this spiritual revolution, this questioning of traditional hierarchies and dogmas, this search for a more authentic and meaningful way of life. And Jainism continues to be a significant religious tradition in India today, with millions of followers who are known for their ethical principles and their commitment to nonviolence. It's like they're a beacon of peace and compassion in a world that can often feel violent and divisive. So we've been on this whirlwind tour of ancient Indian religion, right? From the Vedic tradition to the emergence of Buddhism and Jainism, it's been a journey through a rich and diverse tapestry of beliefs, practices, and philosophical insights. But one thing that stands out that connects all these traditions is the emphasis on the interconnectedness of all things, the consequences of our actions, and the ultimate goal of human existence, liberation from suffering, from the cycle of birth and death. It's like they were all seeking that same ultimate truth, that same path to freedom, that same connection to something bigger than themselves. Now, remember how we talked about the role of play and ritual in the evolution of religion? Well, ancient India offers some fascinating examples of how these ideas played out in practice. It's like they took those primal impulses, those needs for play, for ritual, for connection, and wove them into the very fabric of their religious traditions. For example, in Hinduism, there's a long tradition of ritual drama and dance, which is seen as a way of enacting sacred myths and connecting with the divine. You've got these classical Indian dance forms, Bharatanatyam, Kathak, Odissi, Kuchipudi, and Manipuri, which are not just forms of entertainment, right? They're sacred rituals, imbued with religious symbolism and spiritual meaning. It's like they're using their bodies, their movements, their expressions to tell sacred stories, to embody divine energies, to connect with something larger than themselves. These dances often tell stories from Hindu mythology, depicting the lives of gods, goddesses, and heroes. And they're performed with elaborate costumes, gestures, and facial expressions that convey deep emotions and spiritual truths. It's like they're bringing those myths to life, making them visceral and immediate, allowing the audience to participate in the sacred drama. You also see the use of play and ritual in other Indian religious traditions like Buddhism and Jainism. For example, in Tibetan Buddhism, there's a tradition of ritual debates where monks engage in lively discussions and arguments about philosophical points. This is like a form of intellectual play, a way of sharpening their minds and deepening their understanding of Buddhist teachings. It's like they're using debate as a tool for spiritual growth, for honing their understanding of complex philosophical concepts. And in Jainism, there's a practice called pratikramana, which involves a daily ritual of self-reflection and confession. It's a way of acknowledging one's transgressions, purifying the mind, and renewing one's commitment to nonviolence and ethical conduct. It's like a daily reset, a way of starting fresh, of recommitting to living a life in alignment with their values. So ancient Indian religion, it was more than just a set of beliefs and practices. It was a rich and vibrant tapestry, weaving together play, ritual, mythology, philosophy, and everyday life. It was a way of understanding the world, connecting with the divine, and seeking to live a life of meaning and purpose. All right, folks, we've come to the end of our deep dive into the evolution of religion. I know it's been a long and winding journey, but I hope you found it as mind-blowing and thought-provoking as I have. We've covered a lot of ground, from the playful origins of ritual to the complex tapestry of religious traditions that have shaped human history. We've explored how religion has adapted and evolved alongside human societies, reflecting our changing understandings of the world, our deepest fears and aspirations, our enduring need to connect with something larger than ourselves. So the next time you find yourself wondering about the nature of belief, the power of ritual, or the human search for meaning, remember those ancient impulses, those deep-seated needs that have shaped us from the very beginning. And who knows, maybe you'll even discover something new about yourself along the way.